Hey folks, Dust here, and I wanted to discuss a little bit more about the FACEIT Majors. I already did a video talking about Astralis' win and them cementing their era in CSGO history, but doing content on the Americas has always been kind of a forte of mine. It's kind of my niche, I guess, in content creation here on YouTube, and so I thought I would cover all the Americas teams that represented the region at the Major, talk a little bit about how they did, what things were like going into the Major for them, what they accomplished at the Major, and what their future might look like going forward. And we have 5 teams to cover. That's going to be Rogue, Cloud9, Complexity, Made in Brazil, and Team Liquid. And we will start with Rogue, and we're going to be going in order of how far they progressed through the Major, essentially, and then kind of take it from there. So again, starting out with Rogue, this is the team that made it the, I guess, least distance in the Major, you know, getting knocked out in the challenger stage. And this team, if they retain the lineup, would of course have to go back through the minor system to be able to make it to the next Major, which of course will be early next year at IEM Katowice. So this team heading into the Major was a bit of a mixed bag. You know, they obviously had played with guys like Amond and such in the past before being able to get Ricky. And back then, you know, they were having some troubles throughout the early portion of the year, you know, getting knocked out in the BYOC at Copenhagen Games, having to play in the B tournament, a bunch of DreamHack Open events they weren't able to qualify for, same with like Star Ladder and ESL1 Belo Horizonte. They were able to avoid relegation in EPL and ECS, and they did have a pretty good run at DreamHack Austin, which was in fact their first event with Ricky, where they actually won a best-of-1 against Optic Gaming in their opening game in a crazy 16-13 game, which was very unexpected because you thought with the talent Optic had, they would actually be the ones winning that. Then they actually beat Space Soldiers, also in a best-of-1, wound up making it to the semifinals where they 2-1 Fragsters, which is this young Danish team that had certainly been catching the attention of the international community with some pretty cool results at like BetsNet Masters and, you know, being able to get to some DreamHack Opens and definitely looked promising, but they were able to beat them here. And then they wound up having a pretty decent series against Space Soldiers in the grand finals and really looked fantastic. I mean, this is a really good offline event for the team. Unfortunately for them, they weren't really able to get to any other offline events for a while. They weren't really able to get to that Zotac Americas Regionals finals. They lost to Swole Patrol in the qualifiers for that. They weren't able to qualify for New York or for Stockholm. And so really the only thing they had left was the Americas Minor, which they did manage to qualify for, beating teams like E United as well as Ghost, which of course were not able to use Steel because of the whole Valve ruling thing, but still a pretty decent group of players, able to get past those guys and make it to the Minor. And at the Minor, they did really, really well. They won the opening best-of-1s against Ingatoss and Complexity. They were able to beat E United and Complexity in the games that really mattered to make sure they could make it to the Major. And they ultimately lost to Complexity in the finals of the Minor, but again, the job was done. They made it to the Major, and that was what was most important. Now, at the Major, even though they obviously didn't get very far, you know, getting knocked out with a 1-3 record, there was still some pretty cool stuff going on here. I mean, they had the win against Space Soldiers in the opening game, but obviously Space Soldiers without their full 5 at that event, Engine unable to go due to visa issues, I believe. They had to use their coach or something as a fill-in, which certainly hurt that team. But then they got this 13-16 loss to Astralis, and it looked like they might beat Astralis in that game. It was very close. It was on Inferno, and Astralis actually had to make a comeback to win that game. So that was actually a pretty impressive match, at least from an eye test, just seeing them be able to play Astralis that close on Inferno, a map that Astralis are very, very good on. That was definitely impressive stuff. But then they lose to Spirit huge. Got absolutely waxed by Spirit, and that was very disappointing because Spirit's not really a well-known team right now in International Counter-Strike, not really a big contender, so losing to them so heavily was certainly disappointing. And then they get knocked out by North in what was basically a triple overtime game, if my math is right, looking at the score 25-23. So that was still a pretty, you know, solid game, I guess, at least putting up a good fight, not going down without swinging. And they get eliminated from the tournament 1-3 against a North team that had shown some promise at Stockholm and throughout the year in smaller events, but obviously they themselves really failed at the Major. And so this is the, you know, basically what happened with Rogue. And now we have to kind of figure out what's going to happen next, because apparently Cadian may be on his way to North to be the new operating game leader for that team, which would actually maybe make some sense considering some of the struggles North have had. I can understand why they would be interested in Cadian with what he's been able to do with Rogue. Because, I mean, I think people forget that not only did Cadian be able to get these players together and actually get them working some basic strategies and get them playing well as a unit. But also he was their most consistent fragger by far in all of the online qualifiers and offline events they played, which is basically just Austin, the America's Minor, and the Major. He actually played really well. Some of the best Counter-Strike of his career, actually, probably, with this team. So he's definitely on the up and up. Now, don't get me wrong. Ricky and Vice have also been pretty consistent, good players for this team. Sick can sometimes be quite huge for them, though he's not quite as consistent as some of the others. And then even Hiko at times has still been able to show some of his veteran grit and be able to contribute to this team. If they do, in fact, lose Katie, that will obviously set them back because he was a really good fragger for them and he was their in-game leader. So that's a huge piece to lose based on the development they've been having. But, you know, maybe they can get some other type of capable in-game leader and still be able to continue to play strongly. I mean, I think that, you know, you look at a guy like Finesse is sitting out there. If this team could buy him out from his Cloud9 contract or something can be done to get Finesse on board, that might be an option. Other than that, I'm not really sure what other in-game leading options are going to be available to this team. If they could go to get like a European in-game leader or something like that. They've certainly sprung out for a European before, aka Cadian. They've been able to go to other regions like, you know, Australia to get Ricky. So there could be international options as well. So this team still might be able to do something. Or maybe Cadian winds up staying. Maybe he doesn't wind up getting the North offer and winds up staying on Rogue for longer. Who really knows? I have to imagine, though, if the offer is there, Cadian will leave because I'm sure he would love to get back to living in Denmark and being closer to family and friends and stuff like that. Certainly conveyed that in the whole video that we saw coming out of the FACEIT Major. That was quite emotional. So, yeah, I think that that's really the biggest thing is, you know, how many players are they able to retain will really determine this team's future. But certainly a team that could be promising, at least within the North American region and like the North American EPL and things like that, especially considering the fact that, you know, outside of teams like Liquid, Made in Brazil, and Energy, there seems to be kind of this void there with Cloud9 struggling so much, where teams like a Rogue, like an E United, like a Complexity, maybe like a Luminosity, some of these teams, and Ghost even, are really fighting to be like that number 4 team in North America, which if you can be the number 4 team in North America, that means you're qualifying for ECS and EPL finals events, and you're potentially getting the DreamHack Open events, and you're maybe even working your way into some other Tier 1 events. So that's actually a pretty good place to be, and a lot of teams are fighting for that spot, Rogue being one of them, depending on how the lineup sticks together or not. So just want to put that one out there. Definitely a team that's shown some promise, and certainly will be interested in following them going forward. Now let's take a look at good old Cloud9. And again, right there's a question mark on the page on HLTV, but apparently Flusha is who's going to be playing with them at Blast. And there's also been talk about Scream and certain other players apparently or you know, parties that Cloud9 is interested in. We'll have to see how things shape up going forward, because obviously this team's been in a lot of roster chaos. You know, when you look at the whole situation with Stewie leaving and then, you know, Finesse coming in and then that not really working out. Tarek obviously leaving as well. Finesse wound up getting benched, and you have Golden and Sticko coming in. They've really been through a lot and not accomplished much. You know, Marseille was cool because they were able to, you know, get a win over G2 and FaZe. That was pretty nice, but then they wound up getting O2 by Gamut, which is a super struggling team, so that was definitely really disappointing. And then even going back further than that, you have like Sydney, the EPL finals, the ECS finals, all those things didn't really go well either. To be fair, they're losing to teams like FaZe and Astralis most of the time, but also lost a series to Tyloo at Sydney, only were able to beat Greyhound in Order there, so that's not really that impressive. And then when you look at the EPL finals, they get knocked out by Heroic, so, you know, these are teams that certainly the older Cloud9 that won the major would have been able to beat. So they definitely kind of been slipping down the totem pole rather than growing and advancing, or at least maintaining a top position. And then they had Sticko with them in Cologne, where, to be fair, they only played Astralis and Navi after beating Nip in a best-of-1. So that tournament I can't fault them too much for, given the competition they were up against. But still, the point is they're not really making any progress. And even teams like Energy and such in the North American region have kind of surpassed Cloud9, or definitely have. And certainly I don't think that's something that people would have expected. I think a lot of people thought that it was going to be this Cloud9 Liquid rivalry for who was the best in NA, with obviously the Brazilian core of Fallen, Coldzera, Fur, and whatever team they were going to be on was always going to be up there with those two teams as well. But now you got a team like Energy jumping in the mix of the top 3 in the region. And so Cloud9 really have a lot to do to be able to kind of try to get back on top within the region. I'm not even sure what the hell this team does now, because I think the problem is that Automatic's been a pretty consistent piece for them. I think he still adds a lot of value to this team when he's motivated. It seems like he's a really smart player, really versatile rifler. We've seen him lurk at times. We've seen him be in the mix entering. So it seems like Automatic can bring a lot of value to this team. Golden, as an in-game leader, certainly did a lot with Fnatic before he wound up being removed, and obviously Exists has taken that in-game leader position there. So I think that combination of Golden and Automatic could certainly be some good pieces to build around. And it seems like these players have praised Golden and said that he's one of the best in-game leaders they've played with in some interviews I've seen. So there seems to be something there, but the biggest problem is for one, they don't have a fifth apparently. They've not are going to be playing with Sticko anymore, and they're maybe trialing Flusha at Blast, and who knows what may come of that, seeing as Flusha has not been so hot lately with Fnatic throughout most of this year, especially since Golden departed. So not really sure what to think about that fifth position. And then when you look at Skadoodle and Rush, there's some obvious concerns there. Because for one, I could understand why Rush wasn't performing so well with Cloud9 earlier on, because people like Tarek and Stewie were at the forefront of the team with Automatic. And so Rush was the one that had to make the biggest sacrifices, having to give up the spots he was playing back when he was a star player on Optic. He was no longer this featured entry fragger anymore. He had to play more of a support role on T side. Certainly got to maintain some of his CT positions, like lane on Inferno, for instance, but definitely had to give up a lot on the T side. But on this iteration of Cloud9, he should have been able to come back into that role and thrive. He certainly was being used as an entry fragger in a lot of the games I was watching, particularly in some of the Overpass games I watched, and like whenever they played Hellraisers on Overpass at the Major, and even in some other maps, you could definitely see him being more of a focus, but he didn't really perform. And so I'm now getting concerned on whether Rush is going to be able to return to form now that he's been given his role back, or if this is just another situation where he's going to kind of start fading into the background. And that's a real problem, because I think you need Rush and Automatic firing for this team to have enough firepower to do much. And then even the Skadoodle thing, I was one of the people kind of holding out on Skadoodle when a lot of other people were calling for his departure from the team, because similar to the rest situation, I can understand why Skadoodle took a backseat on the team. When you have all these aggressive prone riflers that are the focus of the team, they're the star players, they're the ones making plays all the time in this fast-paced, aggressive style that Cloud9 were playing. It was guys like Automatic, Stewie, Tarek that were at the forefront. Hell, even Rush is having to take a step back. So I can understand why Skadoodle wasn't really going to be the guy taking initiative and doing a lot. But on this team, he should be the other star player next to Rush and Automatic. That should be the core three pieces of firepower for this team if they're ever going to do anything with this lineup. And he hasn't played up to par either. And so really at this point, it's hard to really know what you can do outside of Golden and Automatic. Like, should Rush and Skadoodle really retain their positions, or should you basically blow this team up, keep Automatic and Golden, find a fifth and work on finding a couple more players as well? I mean, obviously, if they want to, keep their spot and because they'll still be able to play in the Challenger stage next time around. There were former Legends team, even though they won a game, so that stops them from having to worry about playing minors. So they'll be in the Challengers next Major. If they want to retain that, they have to keep three of these players, and it's hard to know what you should do. I mean, I think Rush, Automatic, and Golden make the most sense, but again, Rush really is going to have to step up, and they have to figure out two other players. So this team for me is a huge fucking question mark, and I don't know what to really expect going forward. Didn't want to stick on them for too long, because I think there's a lot of mystery around this team for now. And now we'll look at Complexity, which is basically the goddamn RKO out of nowhere of the Major. This team, I talked about it in one of the preview videos I did for the Major, weren't really doing a whole hell of a lot before they won the minor and did so well at the Major. They were having a lot of problems. They were missing out on a couple of events they were trying to qualify for, but then they were able to make it to Austin, and they were able to qualify for DreamHack Summer as well, but they went out in groups at both of those tournaments and didn't really look impressive at all in most of their games in those events. Then they didn't qualify for New York, came second to Energy, beat some other pretty good teams in that qualifier though, so fair enough. They got beat out by Energy, understandable. But then they got knocked out by E United and Ghost for DreamHack Masters Stockholm. They went out in groups in really rough fashion at that Zotac Americas finals to Furia of Brazil. Didn't qualify for the Starladder Season 6 event, but again, losing to Energy. I can understand the losses to Energy in the New York and Starladder qualifiers. Fair enough. Energy's definitely been one of the top teams in the region, but some of this group stage exits at the DreamHack Open events and how they played at the Zotac Americas Finals against Furia were kind of unacceptable results. And obviously not much online's happened as far as leagues since they put this team together. We have to wait for those new leagues to start up. But yeah, the Americas Minor was brilliant from them. They beat Energy. They were able to beat United. They beat Rogue in the finals. They got the spot for the major. And boy, did they use their spot in the major. And they had to start all the way in the challenger stage because they came from the minor. They lost their opening game to Astralis, fair enough, but then came through against Space Soldiers Big and Vega Squadron. In the Legends, they went 3-0, which was super surprising. It was them and Liquid that went 3-0 first. And they beat Fnatic, they beat G2, they beat Big. I guess it wasn't the hardest journey through these groups. They didn't have to play against like an Astralis or a Navi or a Liquid or some of these other big names, but they still were doing good against a team like Big, who did so well at Cologne and certainly showed a lot of promise. They themselves wound up making the playoffs of this major, so that's fair enough. Fnatic and G2 at least have some pieces that are really good. So all in all, pretty solid run, especially considering how much their offline struggles were before the event outside of the minor. And once in the playoffs, so they did get pretty convincingly crushed by Made in Brazil. Everyone really died down that was playing well throughout the rest of the major. But I think we can at least kind of look at the rest of the major, their play in the group stages, their play at the minor, and kind of see that there's definitely something there for this team. I mean, Stanislaw had absolutely monster numbers going into the playoffs. I think he was like the number 3 rated player from the Legend stage. And had a bunch of big numbers. Standard Shazam was also way up there in numbers for overall rating from the Legends group stage, and you know, and all the opping stats and such. He was right up there with guys like Smooya and Guardian Device and Kenny S. He was putting up some really big numbers. So was Android. He was really high up in rating, and Ye and Def were not too far behind. Like, they were all playing really, really well, and you could see that this team actually had some pretty well-established roles. Like Deft and Ye seemed to be this really good aggressive entry combo on their executes. They had Stanislaw, who could sometimes be a peripheral player, but sometimes could be in the mix and trading in the bomb sites. Seemed to show that same rifling flexibility we've seen from him in the past. Shazam, great op player, and then Angel was that other kind of peripheral, more passive rifler who could still break out, though, on certain executes, and they seemed that really had those roles well established. They were showing that they could play really well on Inferno, at the major and at the minor. Their cash seemed pretty solid. Their Mirage, something they've done well with, at least within the Americas region and at the Americas minor. So they had a few maps that were there. Certainly they don't really play Overpass and didn't really know what their nuke was going to be like. Their Dust 2 is kind of just okay, and they haven't really played Train too much offline. So, I mean, their map pool hasn't really shored up just yet, but there's at least like 3 or 4 maps that they can kind of rely on. And tactically speaking, well, they at times can play a little bit more of a looser style. We've definitely seen them on some maps have like a really good functioning default and have a couple of cool executes. Yeah, sure, they can sometimes do like looser, more like 1-4 split play, but there's definitely a little bit of something there. Like they look the most organized they've looked in several years, really. You know, besides maybe the brief period with Finesse that they had before Stanislaw, this is the most refined we've seen complexity in a couple of years. And I think that there's definitely, again, a lot of room for them to grow if they can keep this lineup together, which I think they should be able to. I think that, again, because of the whole falling of Cloud9, I think that there's definitely a big scrap going on in the Americas region for that number 4, number 5 team that could still qualify for finals for EPL and ECS and be in the mix for qualifications for other Tier 1 events as well as DreamHack Open type events. I think this team is in prime position to fight with teams like Rogue, Luminosity, etc., to try to get some of those spots and try to kind of work their way up the totem pole and be a team to contend with. So definitely, I think being able to get Stanislaw, being able to get an experienced operator like Shazam has really helped this team out a lot. You've seen Def play so much better now. There's actually a true in-game leader on this team. And Ye is really proving to be a solid youngster upcoming on this team, and they seem to have a lot going for them. I'll definitely be keeping my eye on them going forward because this performance at the minor and at the major definitely piqued my interest a little bit on a team that I kind of was brushing off after I saw some of their group stage exits earlier in the year, but now I'm intrigued. I'm ready to see if they can keep living up to the billing or not. So now we have Made in Brazil, who obviously have been through some roster changes. First it was Stewie 2K, and going back to their SK days, and now Tarek, of course, being the most recent addition. Coming into the major, they only played a handful of events, with Tarek as a 5th, you know, the E-League Premier group stage exit where they got beat up by Liquid a couple of times. Then they had the Zotac Masters win, where they didn't really play against that big a competition. Like Flash was certainly just not really a team at all to be worried about. And then MVPK has been kind of cool. You know, the South Korean teams had a couple of cool events here and there, but still not really a big name. And then, you know, beating Kingwin as well. Again, not really a big name, though they have certainly looked good within the Tier 2 and certainly had a really brilliant event at Montreal and seem to be maybe on the rise in the Polish scene. Then after Zotac Masters, you go to the DreamHack Masters Stockholm event, where they were able to make it out of groups, but they did so by beating a Hellraisers team that did not have Woxic, and then, of course, the 2-0 Mouse Sports team that has been struggling since Snax' addition, so not really big names they beat to make it, but again, they can only beat who get put in front of them, and then unfortunately for them, who got put in front of them first in the playoffs was Astralis, where they got 0-2, but they did at least put up a really good fight on Train, losing that one 14-16. Then at the Major, hey, look, they took care of business in the group stage, right? I mean, they won their opening 2 games in a pretty big fashion against Mouse Sports and G2 on D2 and Inferno. They then got absolutely destroyed by Astralis still on Dust 2, that 0-16 loss, but then they were able to beat NIP in a close best-of-3 series, and NIP were looking really good actually at this event, and particularly in this series. So this was a legit best-of-3 win for MIBR. I think NIP is a pretty solid team and will go on to do some cool stuff. And they won this series, you know, winning Cash, winning Train, losing the middle map, which was Mirage. Then they go on to the playoffs. They 2-0 Complexity in pretty easy fashion, but then they got blasted by Navi 0-2. Didn't really look competitive in this series at all, particularly on Dust 2. They looked lost, just like they did in the Astralis game. Almost deja vu in that regard. But in general, I can at least say that up until the Navi match, people like Fallen, at least I can say up until the Navi match, Fallen and Cold seem to be really getting into some good rhythms. They seem to be getting back to some of their old standards. They were definitely putting up some really good numbers throughout the event. Tarek had been fairly solid as well. Fur and Stu were having their issues, but they were also having some good moments as well. And all in all, I think there is a future for this lineup. I think that they could eventually really figure things out. They still did get a top 4 finish at this major after all, and they did beat a pretty legit NIP team, in my opinion. That's a pretty good series to win. They at least, you know, had some good maps against some weaker teams. And, I mean, their map pool seems to be shaping up. Their Dust 2 looked great at first. Now I'm a little bit concerned after the Astralis and Navi losses, especially since Navi isn't really a big Dust 2 team. So kind of the jury's still out, I guess, on Dust 2. Their Inferno looks way improved, though. And their Cash seems pretty solid as well. They seem to be able to play Train. So if Dust 2 can get shored up, they'll have D2, Inferno, Cash, and Train, I think. Overpass and Nuke, I think, is still something to look at, and they obviously ban Mirage right now. So they still need to figure out at least one more map and fix their Dust 2 to try to get their map pool stronger. But technically speaking, I really like this team. They have a lot of role diversity. You know, some maps, Tarek can be more at the forefront, like on Cash, he's kind of with Fur, they're kind of a trading duo. You know, then someone like, you know, Stewie 2K is maybe more playing like Squeaky Door, and Cold's playing outside B, and they're able to play functional defaults. They're able to put together some really cool executes. I actually saw them do a really cool A execute on Cash, where they had some really good Molotov coverage on the site, some cool smokes. So definitely can have some cool executes as well. Can play a default, can be able to pacing change, and you're starting to see some of the old Fallen back as far as shot calling. And then on other maps, you might see Stewie and Tarek take more of a back seat, or particularly Tarek take more of a back seat. They can kind of play more of the edges of the map. And then like Fur and Cold are actually more of a combo at Fallen's AWP. And then Fallen as a player has taken more of a back seat on T sides, more of a support player. He's actually one of the guys that had some of the best flash statistics next to Cold Zera in the major. Takes more of a backseat, like I said, on the attacking side, more of a support for guys like, you know, Tarek and Fur, or Stewie and Fur, or Cold and Fur, whatever the entry combo might be for the map. It seems very map specific. But then on the CT side, he can really flex his op and be active and try to be that dynamic operator on the defense. So I think there's definitely some potential here. I think they just need to work out some more kinks. I definitely don't think that this team's really a tournament contender yet, but I think that you could see this team consistently be able to make themselves out of groups and be able to potentially, you know, make some more semifinals appearances. They're definitely not at a finalist level yet. Not when you have teams like Astralis and Navi out there and a Team Liquid out there. I don't think they're really on that level yet. I don't even know if they're really number 4 in the world. I mean, this ranking you're looking at on screen is from HLTV, and it considers FaZe to be number 5 right now. I'm not so sure that they're really better than FaZe. I think they're maybe more of like a number 5 or number 6 ranked team in the world if I had to make a ranking for them, but they're certainly somewhere in the top 10. I think that's fair enough, but we need to see more out of them because they don't have that many quality best of 3 wins yet. But again, I think that there is some promise there based on what I've seen from them tactically and knowing the talent that they have and the flexibility these players have. So now we get to Team Liquid, the other semi-finalists from the Americas region, but on a much tougher side of the bracket. And this team has been looking pretty damn good for quite some time. You know, obviously that second place finish at E-League Premier, they only lose to Astralis after beating Navi and beating Made in Brazil twice. They also had events like ECS Season 5 Finals where they came second again to Astralis, having beat some teams like Energy and Fnatic in best of 3s. Then you have, of course, the EPL Season 7 Finals where, again, they took second to Astralis, but they were able to beat Navi again in the best of 3, beat Esports in the best of 3 before they were really running into some big issues. But then they've also had their hiccups, like, you know, going out in dead last place at Cologne to Big and North, or going out really early at DreamHack Masters Marseille earlier in the year, losing an embarrassing series to Gambit. So they definitely had their hiccups, but more often than not, they've been a top team. At the major, they performed really, really well, took care of business in the Challenger stage, Legend stage. It's the only team that went 6-0, going 3-0 on both stages they played in. Only match they even had any trouble on were the Vega Squadron game, where they had to go to overtime on Cash to get that victory. Then, of course, the comeback that they had to deal with from Astralis, where they had a really big T side. I think they won 13 rounds in the first half of that Inferno game against Astralis before Astralis makes the crazy comeback. They have to go into OT, but then they win the OT convincingly with the counter choke. Definitely probably should have won that game in regulation. I mean, they lost a 1v3 to Glaive and a 4 versus 2 as well at the last round of the game, or before it went to overtime, rather. So definitely some hiccups there, but got the job done in the end. Then they win pretty convincingly against Hellraisers, who were with their full 5 and were looking good throughout the tournament. They did lose the Dust 2 match, but able to win Mirage and Cash to make it on to Astralis, where again they face their kryptonite, and again they get crushed. As far as performance of these players, before Astralis happens, I mean, Naf was number 4 ranked player in rating from the Legend stage, Twist was number 7, Elige was number 9. You know, so those 3 riflers, Naf, Twist, and Elige, were so fucking on point throughout the bulk of this major. Even Nitro was playing really, really well, doing good in opening kills and opening duels with this AWP. Definitely had some big stats there. These guys were absolutely crushing it, particularly the 3-star riflers, Naf, Elige, and Twist. But again, Nitro certainly doing his job. And I think, look, Nitro is a credible endgame leader now. I mean, you can give Zeus credit, and certainly Zeus deserves it, but I think Nitro is a legit IGL now in the North American region. I think he proved it at Premier when Zeus wasn't behind him. I think even when I was watching him on camera, he was definitely doing the bulk of the talking during timeouts and stuff. So I think that you have to give him credit as the in-game leader now as well, because outside of Astralis, I think this team has the deepest playbook in Counter-Strike. I think that they are very good tactically. I think they're very diverse, and their role flexibility is just as good as MIBR's, if not better. Again, I think Elige is still often a true entry fragger on most maps, but there are certainly some maps where Twist takes more of a focus, or certain executes where Twist takes more of a focus. There are certain maps where Naf might take more of a focus, but there's other maps where Naf might be a little bit more of a backseat. You know, just to give some examples, you know, Naf can play on the edge of the map on a map like, you know, Cash or Inferno or Overpass, but he can also be an entry type player and certain executes on Cash and other maps. And then Twist, you know, he can kind of play on the edge on a map like Mirage, or maybe not be as much of a focus on a map like Inferno on defaults, but on certain executes on Inferno, he can be super active. And then Cash, he can be super active in certain moments, whereas other times he might just play outside B and kind of be more of a lurker. So again, it very much is map dependent or strategy specific on who's taking activity or who's not, but all these guys at different points in time have proven they can be the more active guy. Like when Twist got more engaged as an active rifler is when he showed a lot more promise in this Liquid team. Naf being more of an active force for Renegades is where he really became a star player after being more of a support lurk type player for Optics for so very long. And Nitro is a serviceable opper, you know, as well as being a great in-game leader. So I think that technically speaking, this team is actually really sound. They have set spots for each map that they work really well, but they have that flexibility. They can play fast, they can play slow, they can do cool executes. At times they innovate cool stuff. So yeah, I think this team is really, really good strategically. I think they also have a really solid map pool. Like Cash has been solid for a really long time, but I've started to gain a little bit more confidence, you know, in their Inferno and Mirage from watching the Major, outside of course, the big loss to Astralis on Mirage. They looked really good on Mirage, you know, beating Hellraisers, beating NIP, You know, they beat Optic Gaming. There's been some weaker teams they've beaten on Mirage, to be fair, but I feel like their Mirage is starting to shore up a bit more. Like I said, I think their Inferno's gotten better. I think that they've shown that they can be decent on Dust 2 outside of that loss to Hellraisers. The only real maps that are a problem for them are Nuke and Train. I even think their Overpass might secretly be pretty good. I mean, it hasn't been a map they've played a whole hell of a lot, but when they have played it, they've actually looked really solid on it a couple of times I've played. They even beat Navi on it at one point. Earlier in the tournament season. So I think this team's map pool is actually coming together as well. I think the only real shortcoming for them was in the Astralis series, some of their star players didn't show up as much, which obviously you got to show up against everyone if you want a chance to win. It's the same problem that Simple had against Astralis from Navi. It's like, you're such a legit player, but you got to show up in the big game as well. Usually he does. That was pretty much like, you know, only happened a couple of times where he hasn't performed really well. Not trying to compare them skill level wise, but my point is that, you know, you got to continue to be the star if you want your team to win the trophy. You can't go missing in the big game against your Kryptonite. And a couple of players did struggle on certain maps. And then, you know, Taco, he does his job really well. He's a good support player. I don't think he needs to be cut or anything like that, but he certainly did go missing big time against Hellraisers and Astralis. Like, both playoff matches, Taco was playing really, really poorly. And I think there still needs to be a minimum standard that you meet for fragging. Even if you aren't going to be a star player or a big focus, you still got to not go 8-21, you know, or I just made up that ratio. I'm not sure if he went 8-21 or not, but I know that he were single-digit kills in most of the games against Hellraisers and Astralis, and pretty high on the death count. And so you can't be a burden. Like, you still have to be able to hold your spot on CT side or still be a factor when you're needed in certain rounds. So, again, it was a one-time thing. I think he played good in the other games besides the Hellraisers and Astralis games at the Major, and he's been pretty good for them in general, doing his job. So, again, I don't think he needs to be cut or anything like that. But, again, you got to make sure that everyone shows up appropriately when it comes to the big match if this team's ever going to hoist a trophy. And, you know, the next event this team's going to play at is New York, and FaZe and Navi are going to be there. So prove that you're really better than them. Astralis is not there. There's no excuse not to get the trophy in New York if you're Liquid. You know, if you don't get the trophy in Liquid, you want to lose into a team like FaZe or Navi, then, again, it's like, all right, cool, you're a top 5 team in the world, maybe in the top 3. But if you ever want to get a trophy, then you got to eventually, you know, tackle those guys. They've been able to beat Navi multiple times before, so it's certainly possible. The thing is like, since Twist has been on board, and really going back even further than that, this team hasn't hoisted a big trophy. The only trophy that they've won is CS Summit 2. As far as offline play goes, they've had some, again, finals appearances, but never got the trophy. They need a trophy, I feel like. They're definitely good enough to get it. And I think there's a lot of potential here to be a top team and continue to be one of the best teams in the world. So hopefully we'll see that come to fruition. Anyway, folks, that's going to do it for me talking about these teams in the Americas at the FACEIT Major. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe for more content. Thanks so much for tuning in. Catch you next time.